Good deal. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. What's going on? Welcome to another episode of the Mindful Mentality Podcast. I am your co-host, Mr. Caleb Rosenberg, and joined finally, the trio is back. We'll start with Mr. Will Campbell, brother. How are you feeling?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here. Sorry I missed y'all last week, but I'm back in action.
Hey, you got the whole basketball team at the house, so it's all good. Daniel Rebate, man, what's cracking?
Man, everything's good. Back to snowy Minnesota for the holidays. Snowy and cold. Not where I wanted to be, but we're here.
Yeah, as y'all know, Daniel's been living the good life out in the warmth. So we've been a little jealous. But with that being said, let's get into the disclaimer before we introduce our guest.
Yes, sir. So for those of you guys who haven't been here before, we at the Mindful Mentality. Our podcast has a goal to help at least 1,000 people improve their mindset by challenging their paradigm to break generational patterns. This podcast is to encourage and help everyone live a truly prosperous lifestyle and to show you the power of writing your own story. If you do find any value throughout the show, please help us to get this message to other people who are looking to improve their mentality by sharing this.
Good.
Let's go.
Now, Daniel, who do we have this week that the viewers are really not ready for?
They're not ready for Michael S Seaver. Let's go. Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. How you doing?
I'm fantastic. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I was actually raised in Michigan, Daniel, so I'm not terribly far from the whole Minnesota, very, very cold thing. I get that.
No, you know that real cold. Oh, man.
But I lived in Phoenix for 18 years. I now live in North Carolina where I'm looking outside. It's 70 degrees, brother. So it's a lot different.
Wow.
Must be nice.
On the right here, it was -1.
Oh, that would be negative.
It was like -9.
Yeah,
I spent too many days in the snow. I was working in my family's business from age 12 until 24. So I'll give you a little bit of history or background, right? So when you think about the state of Michigan, I spent the first 24 years of my life there. My parents have a landscaping, lawn maintenance, and snow plowing business. So I used to shovel a lot of dirt, cut a lot of grass, and plow a lot of snow in very cold weather. So I'm glad that I was able to escape that place in the latter part of 2003 because that was rough.
Yeah, it's tough out here, especially. Yeah. I mean, up in Minnesota, you get to this part of the year and it gets to be -20, -25, and it's like wind and everything's freezing. I got a car wash yesterday because my car was just god awful dirty, and then tried to open one of the passenger doors and I was like,
see guys, that's why I left in the latter part of 2003. I left Michigan and I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. So I was in Phoenix for 18 years. And in the summer, guys, from, let's say, May through the latter part of September, early October, it's about 100 degrees most every day, right? So for 5 months, it's 100 degrees. That's the high, and it is not comfortable. So it's like, do you trade off the snow and the cold of Minnesota or Michigan in exchange for it to be 100 degrees every day in the summer in Arizona? What do you think?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going with the heat. I'm going with
the heat. It's tough, but I'll take it.
So I loved being in Phoenix. I'm so glad that I was able to be there or move there. Because when I first got there, I worked at the Four Seasons Resort. So maybe if you guys ever heard of Four Seasons Ritz-Carlton, I worked as a front desk agent in 2004, 2005 at the Four Seasons in North Scottsdale. And it was an awesome experience, right? Because you take this kid who used to cut grass and shovel dirt and plow snow, and then all of a sudden checking some of the world's most profound celebrities, Michael Dell, Burt Reynolds, Phil Mickelson, the CEO of Toyota, these people, I got to meet and interact with them. But there was still that little part of me inside my head that was that small town boy that was raised in West Michigan, right? Yeah. So it was such a wild experience to go from living in a town of 2,500 to moving to Phoenix, where at the time there was about 5 million people. So very big adjustment. But I'm so glad that I did it.
Yes, definitely.
Wow.
So, doing that for a few years was great. And then my life really changed in 2008 because my wife at the time, she left me and divorced me. Now, I was a lot to blame in that situation, right? It's not just that she left. I made a lot of mistakes in that. But the blessing that came out of that was that I immediately went to school to get an MBA at something called the Thunderbird School of Global Management. And it was there that I learned that coaching was meant to be my life's work. Because prior to 2008, I didn't know, right? I cut grass or I was checking people into a hotel. I didn't know any different or any better. So thankfully, as a first year student, I was given a career coach, and she gave me a series of assessments that helped me to see myself in a completely new light. And she said, hey, man, based on my experiences, you would be great working in human resources or in some sort of leadership development or in some sort of like not-for-profit. And that to me didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I was like, I ignored her for about 6 months, right? Because I was like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Like I couldn't make it make sense from the things that I used to do, right? So thankfully, as a second year student, I was able to work for the Career Management Center at the school, coaching first year students on resumes and cover letters and LinkedIn and all of the things back 2009. And it was in those moments on like Saturday night at midnight where I was still coaching these students to help them get prepped and ready that I realized that I was totally losing track of time and that it was time for me to become a coach. Right. And that's how I figured it out. Right. It took me all the way until I was 29, 30 years of age before I was like, yeah, that's the thing I want to do. So if for anybody listening and you don't know yet what it is that your life's work is, it'll come to you, but sometimes in really unexpected ways.
100%.
And that's crazy how you said that it came to you, because at first you said that you didn't want to pay attention to it, and the way that you kind of got intrigued was by helping out.
Yeah. I think that's really the trick is that if by you spending the time taking risks and being okay with making mistakes and failing a little bit, I did not know prior to 2009 that I was designed to be a coach or that I could be a coach, right? It was just not something that ever crossed my mind. But then I was okay with taking the risk, right? It kind of almost like an entrepreneurial risk. Like you do something, it's a very calculated risk. And so I remember doing it. I remember completely losing track of time and just loving it so much. But I did what a lot of other people did because I had just accumulated a bunch of debt, like school loans, is that I took a full-time job at a very large healthcare system in Phoenix right after I finished the MBA. And so there was that part of me that still wanted to coach, but I took the full-time job so that I could make a lot of money, right, to help pay back the loans. And so for about 2 years, I worked in human resources at a very large healthcare system. And that was really nice because I had money, because I had those things, but it was also really hard because I wasn't coaching. Right. And so when you get to, I think it was February of 2011, so about now 11 years ago, I said to myself, I have to find a way to get out of this working full time for someone else. Right. I didn't feel very entrepreneurial. It didn't feel very good to me. So I found a way in October of 2011 to start my business as it is today. So I am today an executive coach. I do a lot of training on leadership or leadership consulting. I do a lot of like changing organizational culture. Of course, a lot of speaking, published a book. I have online courses and other things that I have on my website. But I didn't really discover these things about myself until I was almost 31 years of age. Like my business didn't launch until I was 31 and I'm 41 now. And so when you think about business, for me, I realized it was all about iteration. So when I launched my business, I wrote resumes. And then all of a sudden I became certified to deliver a communications assessment called the DISCs. Then I started doing trainings on communication. And then I figured out a way to come up with a personal brand. And we could talk about that a little bit more too. What does it mean to have a personal brand, or how do you design it? And then I became an executive coach, right? So my business kept evolving and shifting and transitioning to then doing some organizational change consulting. And then earlier in the January of 2021, I published a book called, I'll show you guys here on the screen, but I published this book. And this book was really like 10 years of all of the experiences that I had with clients, anything from writing resumes to changing an entire organization's cultures. I realized that I needed to tell not only my story, but also the stories of some of my clients in a better way. So I couldn't have predicted 15 years ago that I was going to be a coach, or that here I am at 41 years of age, living in North Carolina, doing work that I could never have imagined. Right. And that's kind of, I think, the fun part is you just keep going, taking risks, keep iterating, keep evolving, keep changing, and that the right opportunities just present themselves to you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. And that's something that we've experienced as well. Sometimes it just takes kind of, as Will says, that falling forward and just kind of figuring it out. Obviously, creating a strategic approach to certain things at the end of the day, but really just testing certain things out. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, there's just so many things to do when it comes to investing, or even finding a job or like a career path, and they're like, what should I do? What's going to be the best? And I always tell them, I can't make that decision for you. You have to go through and try different things out. I mean, I'm not necessarily proud of it, but I've probably had too many jobs within the last however many years, but it's because I'm somebody who, I want to feel out, I want to feel what works for me and what's going to, benefit me or just bring me the most pleasure. And so, yeah, I don't know what your guys take on that.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You're not there alone. I had a lot of jobs in the past years myself. And it comes to where you have to know yourself, like he said. Like, you have to find yourself. Like, your thing, you said, is coaching people, and that drives you. Like, someone else's might be something else. So that's the start of everything. You got to find your niche.
And I think the biggest thing, well, not the biggest thing, but one of the biggest things, like Michael mentioned, was adaptability. You know, 'cause you don't know what's going to be thrown your way. You just got to make sure that you keep the ball rolling.
Yeah. And that's so key. And I'm glad that you said that, Daniel, because when you think about, maybe, my grandparents and my great grandparents, maybe the same for you guys, is that back then in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in America, there was something called cradle to grave employment. And what that meant is that a person in America would work for the exact same company his or her entire life. Right?
Yes, yes, I've seen that.
seriously.
Yeah,
This was a
literally.
thing.
I know one of my friends, his grandpa had just retired from a company that he worked for almost 60 years.
Yep.
Jamal's grandpa.
Yep, perfect. Perfect example, right? And so, Caleb's giving me the like, hey, like, what is that? So, like, but it's a thing, right? And so, let's explain it more through the economy. So, back in 1929, the American economy was a $1 trillion economy, right? It's a very small economy. This past year, 2021, we were about a $23 trillion economy, right? So, in about 100 years, America has grown exponentially. But in a $1 trillion economy, the number of jobs were not as profound, right? We just didn't have the internet. They just didn't have those things. So our grandparents or our great grandparents, if they found a job, they stayed with it their entire life, right? Because they really didn't have much other choice. Now, fast forward to where we're at in the early part of 2020. Well, now we're 2022, but in the 2020s, like, there are so many ways that we can make money. And it's actually to your benefit to try a lot of different things. So, Caleb, it's not bad that you've tried a few things here, like, at all. It's not bad at all. That's a great thing, because it shows that you're willing to learn really rapidly. And that's the absolute key to being able to launch in your career. Had I been exposed to that type of stuff in the early 1990s or the early 2000s, I might have become a coach sooner, right? But I was just kind of stuck cutting grass and shoveling dirt. And I didn't have, in a town of 2,500 people, there were just not a lot of other options for jobs. So I feel a bit of envy for the three of you if you've had those opportunities to experiment and try, because that's where really rapid learning comes from. And that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And I love that you brought the part about just experiences and education, because that's what I devote probably the last 2.5, 3 years of my life is just learning. I mean, in all types of ways, whether it's, just learning in just so many different vast ways, to where I tell Daniel and Will all the time, I wouldn't trade the experiences and the hardships we've been through the last 2 years, kind of doing business together as a team, just because of the things that we've experienced, the things that we've learned, and just how many different things that we've just.
Yeah, I know. And before I even met them, like, I've been through multiple things, MLM programs and all type of things I went through, and I had to find myself, really. So
yeah, that's a good way to say it, Will. That's really what it is that I think that we all come to Earth with what I call an Earth school curriculum. And I just what I believe, and this is a little bit out there, but I think it's important, is that our just imagine this, right? Before you choose to come to earth, right? Before you choose to be born to a specific set of parents, your soul sits down with God, source, spirit, creator, whatever you want to call it, or like spirit guides or like angels. And it says, okay, here's the curriculum of things that I want to learn while I'm on earth for the 100 years that I'm on earth. And then so we choose the things that we're going to do for the 100 years that we're here. But earth is just this place where we're supposed to come and have experiences, right? That's all it is. We're not meant to do anything extravagant or particular, right? We come to earth, we have this curriculum of things we need to learn. And sometimes that comes, through multi-level marketing programs, or sometimes that comes through starting off a business from scratch. You learn a whole bunch through that. I have definitely in my business been through a lot of iteration and constant evolution, and it has taught me an immense amount. So in 10 years of owning my coaching practice, I have probably had the experiences that an average person might have in 100 years, right? Because I intentionally put myself into very stressful, very difficult situations to force my own learning that would then help me help more people. And now you guys in your own respective business, having lots of things go well, some things not go quite as well, that just gives you experience that you can then coach and help other people too. And that's beautiful.
Yeah. And I love that because I want to kind of touch on that and really give the viewers kind of like a focus point on it's not bad to go through certain tough times, obstacles, hardship, whatever the case may be. It's not bad to have to figure it out in a sense. That's kind of like my life motto is I'm going to figure it out. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I want us to kind of go around and kind of discuss this topic of finding value in not necessarily failing, but just things not panning out. Because I don't like the word necessarily failing. More so that when things just don't go your way, how are you going to adapt to that? How are you going to adjust to that? How are you going to use it to your benefit? So I kind of want us to touch on that. Because I know we all have different perspectives on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's great. Since meeting that coach in 2008, 2009, I've made it a bigger part of my journey to take personality assessments, right? The DISC, Myers-Briggs, Emergenetics, 4 personalities. There are so many, predictive index. There are a lot of personality assessments that you can take online that give you a deeper window into understanding how you communicate, right? Mm-hmm. There's also assessments for motivation. There's also assessments for core values. But the thing that has allowed for me, in addition to using those, that has helped me the most is when I make mistakes, right? I don't automatically shame or judge myself, right? And that's absolutely critical. You can't shame or judge yourself, right? The time that you're on earth it's about experiences. And it just so happens that mistakes are the fastest possible learning experience you can have. Right. Like if you think about it, if you're going to go to a high school or a university class, you're going to sit in class for 3 months and hopefully by the end of the 3 months, you're going to learn something. But literally instantaneously, what do you think, Daniel? Literally instantaneously.
Oh man, it just clicked when you said that. Like
really?
Continue.
No, but it's a great point. Like if you go to a university class for 3 months, you're intending to learn something in a 3-month time frame. But if you make a mistake, you're going to, because you're engaging your 5 senses to learn that experience or to have that experience, you're going to learn it instantaneously, right? So in the future, universities are not going to exist, right? They're not going to be what they are. They're going to go away because we will all learn through mistakes. So, sorry, let me bring this full circle. Is that there are lots of assessments, there are lots of ways that you can learn about yourself, but I think the fastest way to do it doesn't cost a dime. And it's you make the mistake and you immediately journal about it. You immediately reflect on it, right? And that's, so I use a spreadsheet inside my computer so that I can search it later. And every single day I track various things that I was thinking, that I was feeling, lessons that I learned from the day or the week before. And that has sped up the pace of learning. So failure and mistakes are not bad. They're actually the fastest route to advancement.
Oh,
yeah, that's
that was a whole lot of facts.
Yeah. And I'm gonna give you a scenario like we were into real estate wholesaling and we veered away from it, but what it's brought us to is digital marketing in general, as being just digital marketers. And what real estate wholesaling has helped us with is that point of putting systems together and creating marketing channels and prospect channels and knowing how to market something. So I give definitely what you're saying for real.
Yeah. And I think a big thing is, well, I mean, I went to college for a year and a half, and I obviously didn't see not the need of it, but I didn't see myself progressing. In terms of like, and that really made sense when you put it into words, how you're learning, but nobody is like, you don't even know if you're learning the correct things, because one, you're not failing until you take your test at the end of the semester, and two, there's nobody like coaching, or I don't know, like, you don't really have a sense of accomplishment or achievement if until that the end of the term.
Yep.
Not every day.
Yeah, and there's nothing tying that information down to you. Like it's just information. It's not how we're, for example, for you getting into the land development, just educating yourself. That topic is tying you down because it's something that means something to you or something that you're passionate about. But when you're just throwing information, there's nothing tying it down intuitively to be like, okay, let me just actually retain the information.
Yeah. Yeah. You think back to the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, like going to a university made sense because the pace of life in America was much slower. Right. It was just a lot slower. Right. So you went to a job every day that it just wasn't as fast paced as society is today. Right. Because of the internet. Right. So 1995 was a really important time in human history because it was the launch of the internet. And so anything kind of pre the year 2000, the pace of life was just slower. So going to a university, it was okay. You could learn in 3 months and then apply on your job because you were pretty much in the same job most of your life. But today, 2022, we're in an environment where the pace of change, because of globalization, because of technology, because of the World Wide Web, it is so much faster that sitting inside of a university for 2 years or longer, attempting to learn something, by the time the 2 years has come and gone, the degree that you intended to get is no longer useful in society. Like literally no longer useful. Yeah, exactly.
It's evolved. Yeah.
Completely. So the best thing that we could each be doing right now is exactly what Caleb, Will, and Daniel are doing. And it's trial by fire, right? It's making the mistakes, learning what it is you need to learn, and say, okay, the most important aspect of this business is actually digital marketing. Let's kick ass at that. Right. And then figure out that piece and learn from there. And then in, a year's time or 2 years time, then you'll shift and transition again, like whatever it is. But university degrees, and it's called rote memorization learning. And in that, it's just dead. Right. There's no need for it anymore. The best way that we can possibly learn is through experiencing it ourselves and feeling it with our 5 senses, because that's the thing that keeps it in our head, top of mind, or keeps it more easily accessible, right, where we can remember it faster.
Because what's information without the retention?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why universities and high schools, they try to use repetition, right? They try to get you to read the same thing or listen to the same thing or whatever. And that does work. Repetition does work on the human mind, but it is not as powerful as physically experiencing it for yourself, right? Because now there's an emotion and some sort of sense attached to the memory. And when that happens, right, when you attach some sort of one of the 5 senses or emotion to the memory, that's when you can very quickly recall it and say, that was a big mistake. I don't want to make that again. Or that worked out really well. I need to emulate it. But in rote learning, you have to go back to the notes that you typed into your computer to remember what the hell you learned.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, I don't have time for that.
Yeah. And I think also something I was just thinking of while you were explaining that was that the human brain is wired to avoid any type of pain, discomfort, or something that can harm you. And so your brain is, it being that it's automatically wired to that way, when you have an experience that was a negative experience in retrospect, where you just didn't go the way you wanted to, or you just didn't perform at your best, whatever the case may be, that's going to resonate in your brain to, like you said, I don't want to do this again because this feels uncomfortable. It's a type of pain that your body is kind of being adapted to at that time. Right. And so being able to have that versus, as you said again, compared to just information being thrown at you. That's why a lot of jobs nowadays, they're saying, your piece of paper is great, but I want 4 years experience, I want 6 years experience, because they want to see that, they know that the piece of paper, it's great and all, but without you being in the actual job, in the everyday operations, you're not going to know how to operate. So I love that, just because it goes back to a cognitive thinking standpoint, which people don't understand that part.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it, Caleb, is that it's what's referred to at the very back of the brain as something called the limbic system. And so we collect information from everything around us via the five senses, right? Taste, touch, sound, smell, all that. So we collect the information, it comes into the human nervous system, but in order for our brain to process it, it has to pass through something called the limbic system, which is kind of three pieces of our brain. And what Caleb was just describing was something called the amygdala hijack. And so when the information comes into our five senses, it runs first through this part of our brain called the limbic system. The amygdala picks it up and says, if this is scary, do I need to fight, flight, or freeze? And that's what Caleb was just describing. And if we have an event from our past that caused us to fight, flight, or freeze, right? It was scary to us. Then in the moment today, we will stop. Right? But if the event is not scary or it doesn't trigger us, then the information goes to the front of our brain to something called the neocortex, where it can actually be processed rationally, right? We can actually make an objective, unemotional perception or some sort of decision. So it's just really interesting how the world has kind of designed itself where we are inundated with so much information, so many distractions, and so many interruptions. Like the most valuable thing today, as you guys know, is attention. Right. I mean, that's really the jam, right? If you can hold someone's attention, that's power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's the game that, I don't know if you've seen the movie, The Social Dilemma.
I've heard of it. Haven't seen it.
Oh, wow. Have you guys seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it. It's the one on basically how people are addicted to social media and their phones. And
but
it really holds our attention.
Yeah, because it's designed. Instagram especially and even these other social apps.
It's on Netflix, isn't it?
Yeah,
I haven't watched it yet.
It's on Netflix. Yeah, it's a film because it's all true. And basically, they bring on these CEOs or the people who were the founders or the creators, whether it was the software, the design, the marketing teams, the whatever the case may be for your Twitter, your Instagram, your Facebook, your YouTube, all these major companies that we know and love today. The people who are the founders basically of these or who started these, they say, we designed these specifically to make it where you will not leave. Like we are capturing your attention. Because as you just said, the power is in the attention. The money is in the attention. And these companies understand that. And once they've done all their little algorithms and whatnot to basically get you to keep scrolling. And there's so many different things that play into that. But that's what I think about is
that goes into a lot of spiritual things.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It does. And that's a very true thing. So I haven't seen the movie, but in my work, I end up studying a lot of the same things. So I'll have to watch it at some point. In that there are just certain things that keep people focused, and oftentimes it's fear, right? It's intentionally hijacking the amygdala at the very back of the person's brain to keep them focused in on whatever material they're sharing. So the algorithms are actually designed inside Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I don't remember the percentages, but a certain percentage of the posts are meant to show up as being things that will trigger fear inside of you, so that you will keep scrolling to make sure that there's some other safe thing that will happen. So it's like every X number of posts is meant to be something that triggers your fear based on things that you've liked or searched before. Right.
Wow.
And so it's gnarly.
Now that you say that, I definitely feel what you're talking about. That's definitely true. Because sometimes you maybe it's not fear, but it's like fear of something, like fear of it being true or fear of it being false or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But
It's there.
Yeah.
And it's okay that those things exist. It's just being aware of it, right? And thankfully, most of our phones have the ability, we can track the number of hours that we're on social or not. I get all of that. But what's really important to take a step back and understand is that Harvard did a study that started back in the late 1930s, and it's still ongoing. It's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And what they found over 80 some odd years of studying human interactions, because they're trying to understand what leads to a long, happy, and healthy life, right? They're really like trying to figure that out. And they're saying, well, is it fame? Is it power? Is it money? Is it success? And all of those things are not what leads to a long, happy, healthy life. What does lead to it is the quality of our closest relationships. So if you have really good friends, or you have strong connections to your family, or people around the world, however that works, if you can have really in-depth, vulnerable, risk-taking discussions with people and still feel heard and appreciated and accepted for who you are, you're going to live to be 120. Like, it's that simple. But, if you're overly focused in on things along the lines of social media, or constantly comparing yourself to who it is that you see on Instagram or similar, your lifespan is going to be a lot shorter. You're going to be a lot more stressed. Your brain is going to release something called cortisol, which basically fastens the aging process. So if you're constantly living in fear and your brain is producing cortisol, your body is aging at more than double the rate that it normally would. So scrolling social media isn't just scrolling social media, right? The effects, because it's such a new thing to the human species, the effects of it, we don't know. We really don't know, right? We would need another 100 or 200 years to really thoroughly understand its impact on people. But when your brain releases cortisol, your body ages at basically double the pace that it would normally would. And so people get really unhealthy and unhappy really quickly, when all they have to do is spend a little bit less time on social and a little bit more time being social with people close to them.
And another thing, it's Facebook is the number one I always talk about. Like, and I just can't help myself sometimes. I just gotta click on that app. Like,
That's all it is.
and when I'm scrolling, if I see something I don't like, I'm scrolling to the next to find something I do like. You can't
But you're
even help
scrolling.
Yeah.
And that's what they want.
It's crazy, man. It's when you understand social media means medium, and medium goes back to witchcraft. So
yeah, and I like how we're talking about this, because it brings up the topic of awareness, and that's something that we've touched on a few episodes in the past, but I wanted to bring it back up because awareness is kind of a broad topic, and there's so many different ways we could go about it. But I want to talk about just being aware of your life and aware of your mind in general, because we're dropping a lot of gems right now as far as the human brain and how it operates. And so how can people, as far as, an open discussion, I want to hear what you guys think. How can people become more aware of the things that not that they're doing, but the effect that it's going to have on them long term, whether it be scrolling on social media, or just the idea of something I'm doing right now doesn't just affect right now, it can affect down the line.
Like he said, it's like we're never going to know 100 to 100 years down the line of the effects of social media, really. But it just depends on what you're talking about. If you're just talking about social media, then
just in general, how can somebody, like, as an individual, because that's kind of what we're doing for our viewers, we're trying to educate them on how to be better, how to be more effective with their mind. And so how can somebody kind of I guess be more aware of the effects of their actions or thoughts?
I think one of the first things you have to do is kind of catch yourself on your thought. 'Cause I know before we act upon something, we have that thought of should, or like, are we gonna do this? And I think once you catch yourself, if it's negative or positive, like, it's on you to turn it around.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's right, Daniel. So in psychology, right? Daniel Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence back in the late 1990s, and his discovery is that our success in the world, about 20% of our success comes from our IQ. 80% of our success comes from our EQ, or what Caleb was saying, which is, self-awareness. And so in emotional intelligence, there are 5 dimensions, right? The first one, the base one, is self-awareness. So Caleb bringing it up was beautiful, right? It's critical, because when you are aware of your own emotions and where they come from, and then how they affect your capacity to make decisions, that is the absolute base place that you should start, right? You have to understand your own emotions. Number 2 of the 5 is something called self-regulation. So when you get your amygdala gets hijacked or you get triggered, do you have the ability to not take action, right? Do you have the ability to just stop there and take a deep breath, or do a journal, or go for a walk alone? Because most people won't self-regulate. Most people will get really angry. They will say something. They will be hurtful to somebody else. So self-regulation is the second. Third piece is something called motivation. And this is like when things are not going great, do you still have the capacity to keep moving forward towards something that's really important, right? Do you still have the motivation? 4 is social awareness. How well do you recognize other people's emotions? And then 5 is social regulation, which is your ability to basically build and maintain relationships. So let me give you the kind of the 5 pieces that I use to design a personal brand, but I'll talk about it through the lens of self-awareness.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
And that will help it make sense. So, okay, so in emotional intelligence, there's these 5 dimensions, the core being self-awareness. Well, how do you find yourself? Like, where the hell does that come from? Right. And so the way that I do it is I ask a client to basically collect 5 data sets of information about themselves. Okay. So number 1 is their DISC profile. I'm certified to use the DISC profile, which is a communication style. It's basically like the words you choose, your tone of voice, or your nonverbal body cues, right? And there's 4 kind of core styles. So when a person comes back and knows his DIS or C style, that's a great thing to know that they might not have known. And there's free versions on the web that anybody can take. Number 2 is what motivates you, right? So I'm certified to use an assessment that looks at kind of 12 key motivators that apply across all humans around the world. So which of those 12 motivators is most motivating to you? Sometimes it's being altruistic or selfless, or sometimes it's producing money, or sometimes it's being in power. Sometimes it's just being in really beautiful places, right? That's okay too. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just knowing that. The third thing, I've already mentioned this once before, is the idea of core values. Like, what are those lessons that you've learned throughout your life? So if you know what your top 5 or 6 core values are, now you can start to make better choices through the lens of your core values. And then the fourth thing, and this is the hardest thing because it's a little bit more subjective, is that I want people to answer a series of questions about their past, their present, and their future. And what those are designed to do is to drive deeper levels of self-awareness about what shaped you to become who you are today. And then the last piece is like your strengths or your authority, what makes you different or unique in the marketplace, right? So if you have your DISC, your motivators, your core values, kind of a history of your life and what shaped you into who you are, plus your strengths, now we can collect all these 5 data sets about who you are and put them together and say, okay, what are the patterns that exist across each of these? Right? So that I can know for sure that this is me. So then when you identify the patterns, the next step is to write a personal mission statement, kind of like a personal brand. Hey, this is who I am. This is why I exist. And then to be looking at your top 5 or 6 core values really regularly. And then to write a unique value proposition statement. Sometimes people look at this as like the summary at the top of a resume, but I like to think of it more of like an executive biography, right? What's the paragraph or 2 about you that you really want people to know that describes your experience? So through the lens of emotional intelligence, self-awareness is the core. And through those 5 data sets, you can get to a deeper understanding of not only what shaped you into who you are, but also your core values, what motivates you, and how you're going to communicate in the world. And when you know those things, you can be immensely powerful. Immensely.
Yeah, that couldn't be more
That was
true.
fire.
I love that because one part as well that I want to connect that to is finding your why and your purpose. It ties into especially going back on, looking at your past and what developed you, because a lot of people will, try to find their purpose, try to find their why, but once you truly dig down deep, when I told Daniel this, that was about a year and a half ago, we probably had this conversation, and I told him when I kept asking myself why, because when it comes to finding your why, you want to keep asking yourself, okay, well, why do I want that? Okay, but why? Okay, but why? And keep digging and digging and digging. And I got to a point where it was my why is something, the reasoning behind it is something that's way back in my childhood when I was less than 10 years old. So digging deeper, like I love how you said just understanding your past to correlate why you are the way you are, why you operate the way you do now, and why you just. I love that. This. Oh my god.
One of the things that's hard for people to understand is that because it's not talked about a whole lot, is on Earth there's something called the electromagnetic spectrum, and what that is like it's Wi-Fi, it's your microwave, it's how information gets moved around from place to place, but we physically can't see it. So of the entire electromagnetic spectrum on Earth, the human eye can only see 0.003% of it. Okay, so you can't see right now 99.9999% of what's happening right in front of your face. You can't. Right? The human body is very constrained and very small relative to what's actually happening around it. But the reason I tell you that is that Dr. Bruce Lipton has done some research that from birth until age 6, I'm going to support what Caleb said. From birth until age 6, all humans are in something called the theta brainwave state. And there are 5 brainwave states. And what the theta brainwave state is it's like almost like being under hypnosis, right? Everything that happens around you is automatically baked straight into your subconscious or your unconscious, right? So from birth until age 6, you kind of come to Earth as this perfect being, but then you are just, for 6 years, you're just absorbing everything around you because you consciously don't yet have the ability to make choices or decisions because you're still learning from your parents, your guardians, or your community, right? So, and to Caleb's point, a lot of us have traumas around age 4, 5, 6, 7 from our families, from people in our community, whatever that is. And then so after you get past age 6 and your brain moves into something called the beta brainwave state, now what you do consciously is you repeat everything that you watched happen from birth until age 6. So if your parents had some sort of habit, routine, or ritual, you unknowingly repeat that for the rest of your life unless you figure it out, right? Unless you recognize it. You don't realize that you're doing it, but you are. So to Caleb's point, right, we all have those, what's called an adverse childhood experience. And so University of Tennessee calls them ACE scores, adverse childhood experience. And so there's many things that you can do to go back and like the University of Tennessee's website to look at it and say, well, what were those adverse childhood experiences that I had? How did they shape me into who I am today? And then what decisions am I making now based on that trauma? Because many people make a lot of choices today based on those traumas, not based on being in a whole, healthy, happy place. Okay. So self-awareness is a lot of things, right? It could be an emotional intelligence assessment test. It could be those 5 data sets that I just referenced, kind of designing what your mission might be. But also self-awareness is, okay, what the hell happened when I was a kid, right? What was I taught? What did my parents teach me? And am I unknowingly repeating those exact same behaviors today in a way that's not helping me? And for the people that I serve, that is absolutely happening.
Yeah. Jeez. Wow. And that's crazy because that's something I know Daniel will really feel this because that's something we've talked about from day one of starting this podcast over a year ago is that subconscious mind. People will sometimes do things without even knowing that they're doing a certain thing or that they do that on autopilot. Like some people, for example, we use the analogy of people kind of like being negative or just kind of not being optimistic. And something that we've brought up before is that person, when you tell someone an idea and they just say something that's not either whether it's snarky or it's just kind of like negative or closed-minded, sometimes they don't even realize that they're doing that because it's so ingrained in them in their subconscious that they've done it for so long to where it's second nature. That's normal to them. So I love how you touched on that sometimes it's unknowingly, if not most of the time, it's unknowingly.
Yeah. But you can see, like you said, somebody that's negative, you go and help them out, and they're going to be like, why are you helping me out? I'm sorry. You looked like you needed help.
Yeah. But some people take that and they're like, that's how whether they grew up that way or they're just not used to that, or it's just something that's in their brain that is rejecting that idea, but that's not the first time that they've done that, which is the crazy part.
Yeah. That I heard it described once where the person said that all emotional reactivity today is due to a previous unhealed wound. Right. So something that happened in childhood, teenage years, 20s, whatever it is. And so it's really important to recognize that, right? So from birth until age 6, all of this information that's happening around us, all of the our parents teaching us how to be a member of society gets baked straight into our unconscious. Now, what Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about is that the unconscious mind.
I love Dr. Joe.
You do? Good. Okay.
Yeah.
He said that the subconscious or unconscious part of the human mind, body, whatever, it processes 400 billion bits of information per second. But the conscious mind, right, our conversation right now, we can only process 2,000 bits per second, right?
Wow.
So Caleb's right? The things that are happening for us unconsciously absolutely drive our behavior, and we have no idea that it's occurring. Right? How easy is it for each of us to get inside of a car and know how to drive it, or get on a bicycle and know how to ride it, or to pick up a pen and to write, right? It's been baked into our unconscious that we just know how to do them without consciously thinking about it. But when we're having to do something new, have a conversation, right, whatever that is, of course, our conscious mind, the 2,000 bits per second, it takes over. We have to be, it's like we have to be more involved at that level. Right, something that's a little bit more focused or conscious. What do you think about that, Daniel?
Well, sorry. Yeah. So the way that I was looking at it is like your subconscious mind is like that little robot that picks up everything that you're looking at, but your conscious mind is basically that negative Nancy who's always telling you that something is not how it's supposed to be going, and it's on you to kind of turn that around. But it's crazy how, like you said, your conscious mind takes over during these situations. Mm-hmm. Like it just did right now. It completely got me off guard because I felt like my subconscious mind was picking up all the things, and that's why I was feeling some sort of way about what you were saying. I was getting these vibrations or these waves that you were talking about of knowledge, but the mind that was thinking for itself was like, how am I actually picking these things up?
Yeah. And the lens by which we see the world is what our parents give to us from birth until age 6. Right. And so part of it's like, it's the whole nature versus nurture discussion, right? So the whole nature thing is that, okay, you have a particular communication style, you're motivated by certain things, like those things come with you at birth, right? You can't change that stuff. You have learned behaviors that you can kind of work around them, but for the most part, the nature part is your communication style, what motivates you. But the nurture part is, what is it that you were taught via your family to what was right or wrong? And that was their perception of right or wrong. That doesn't mean it's your right or wrong. It's what they believe to be right or wrong. And what you have to remember is back in the 50s, 60s, 70s in America, when the baby boomers were being raised to their level of success, they were raised by parents who were a part of the Great Depression and almost 2 world wars and a famine. So a baby boomer is really heavily focused on safety and security, having a good job, wanting to stay at the same place, build up the retirement account, right? All that stuff. Whereas millennials are much, much more not worried about those things. Like they trust themselves at a very deep level that they know that they're going to find the money regardless, or that they can put in whatever work is necessary to find it. And so they're much more focused on self-esteem and self-awareness and trying to discover their life's purpose. Whereas baby boomers, for the most part, they don't care about that stuff, right? That's not interesting to them. Because they were raised at a time in human history by parents who taught them that the only goal was financial security. But because the baby boomers had financial security, they taught Gen X and Gen Y, or the millennials, they taught them not to worry as much about financial security because it's pretty much already there for most of them. And they taught them to focus on their mission and their purpose and why they were on Earth. Like, what's the impact that they were going to have? So the things that we have to remember when we think about self-awareness, or to Daniel's point, is that our parents, kind of subliminally kind of acculturated us to believe a certain thing that was appropriate for their time in human history. but it is not appropriate for this time in human history. So we have to be, through reflection, journaling, conversation, listening to podcasts, we have to be continually shedding those old mindsets that our parents gave us, like all the time. And that goes back to what we talked about 45 minutes ago, right? You have to be constantly iterating and changing. And that not only exists for what you do career-wise, but it's also about your mental model and how you see the world. So you have to constantly be adjusting, changing, iterating, and evolving in order to keep up with the pace of change in society, so that you don't keep looking at the world the same way that your mom and dad did.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to we live in a world now, like Mike had said, that everything is so fast paced and is continuously changing and evolving. So if you don't evolve as well, you're going to naturally fall behind. So it's critical to always be improving, always. And that's something we say all the time, is that working on your mentality, working on your mindset, working on your personal development, it's not a 1 year, 10-year type of deal. This is an ever going thing for the rest of your life. It's a lifelong commitment of, I'm committing to myself to continuously do what I need to do, or do what I can to improve my mentality, improve my thought process, improve just me as a person overall, just my personal development. So I just love that. Just the idea of continuously evolving.
Well, it's like a pencil. You gotta keep sharpening yourself over the years, or you're gonna get dull.
Yeah, try to make yourself better every day, 1% better.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I'm glad that you said that, Will, because there's a lot of truth in that. So 0.1%, 1%, you pick the number, but our society, especially because I'm 41 years of age, right? So for those folks who are kind of Gen X, kind of early millennials, there was a lot of focus on comparing ourselves to somebody else who was more successful according to society. And I just never really got on board with that. I've just never really been a huge fan of that. And I don't entirely understand why. But what I've realized over the last probably 5 or 6 years is that the only person I'm really competing against is who I was yesterday. And that's a hard thing to come around, because our parents, say that we should be competing, or that we're supposed to go get such and such a degree, or that we're supposed to make X number of dollars, because society says that that's okay. And I get that's what the mainstream media, mainstream society says is what's supposed to happen. But if you haven't looked around for the last couple of years, the mainstream media and the narrative that exists is completely dissolving, right? Like the society that we knew 3 years ago doesn't exist, and it's not going to exist in the future. So the thing that matters most is what Will just said, is that every day we spend a little bit less time worrying about how do we compare to someone else, and we spend just a little bit more time, journal, reflection, conversation with friends, accountability partners, right? Whatever, making sure that we're better than we were yesterday. And if we do that, that's a life well lived.
Yes. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Nail in the coffin. Said it perfectly. Oh man. So there was something in the beginning of our conversation that I really wanted to touch on. As far as going through, because I know you talked about your divorce, and you said something really, really quick that I don't know if the viewers picked up on it, and it was the going through such a heavy event, and then being able to still turn around, transform yourself, and thinking positively. Because I know that's something that I've read up on you as well, is that one of your biggest things is maintaining a positive mindset, maintaining that positive attitude through such drastic changes in life, or things that are, not the greatest. So can you just touch on just, I guess, just give the people some insight on how can somebody, how would you tell somebody, I guess, how to work through those types of things similar to as you did?
Yeah. Thanks for asking, Caleb. It's so, my life, I can't say that it's been harder than most, but it has been pretty challenging. I haven't had a lot of physical problems, but I've had a lot of emotional challenge in my life. And I talk about that in the book quite a bit, in the feelings around that. So in 2008, my wife left me. And there were some other things that happened at the beginning of my business where I just wasn't making money. It was really tough. And then just about 2.5 years ago, in May of 2019, I contemplated committing suicide, because I was just so fed up with stuff in general. So when we look at Earth, right? Whether you think about through the Christian ideology around sin, everybody makes mistakes and it's kind of deemed as sin. Or you think about Buddhism, they talk about life being suffering through something called the Four Noble Truths. And so there are just, these very kind of religious, very historical contexts have always talked about Earth is like a school where we go through challenging events to become more awakened, more wise, better, smarter, like whatever it is, right? So just imagine that Earth is a place that's full of suffering that is meant to create a new type of emotional self-awareness or resilience in us, right? So that's kind of a key piece. So for me, what I realized through having executive coaches myself, I've had therapists, I've had energy healers and Reiki masters, like I've spent a lot of money in the last few years having other people help me make sense of why my life played out the way that it did, right? What did those events mean? So what I've finally come to realize, and I want everybody that's listening or watching to like really hone in on this, because when a negative event happens, the event doesn't actually have meaning, right? We create the meaning for the event. The event doesn't have meaning. Like on Earth, it's just an objective event, right? It's just an event. So our soul, our body, our mind says, okay, that was a negative thing. And what do I do about that? Well, I cry, I get angry, I do whatever. So what I've come to realize is that in order to reprogram that unconscious part of our brain, we have to consciously say, here's a bad event that happened. And I initially thought that it was negative because it made me feel this way, this way, this way. But then the key piece, there's two other steps, is that after you've associated and named what the negative emotion was, is that always, and this happens all the time, it doesn't matter, it just happens all the time, is that eventually, it could be a couple of months, it could be a couple of years, eventually we start to recognize that there's actually a positive outcome to that negative event. Right? We learned an important lesson. We met somebody. We changed businesses. Like there's anything that can happen, right? So we have an event that doesn't have emotion or meaning. We initially associate it with a negative emotion, but what happens is a couple of months, maybe a couple of years later, if we can retrain our brain to say, okay, here are the positive effects of that negative event. Now our brain is starting to rewire and to not think of the event as bad, but to think of it as good. Okay, that's really important. And then the last step, and this is the thing that does the most healing, is that we say, okay, we have this event. We initially thought it was negative. We are now associating positive emotion with it. And the thing that's going to heal it is when we teach other people how to overcome that exact same challenge for themselves. It's the process of teaching others. That's the absolute key. Right? So that's the thing. It's event, negative feeling, positive feeling, teach someone else. And then you do that your entire life. And you're going to be very influential.
That's crazy. No, because I definitely I've come to terms with that, because let's say I've had an experience in the past where let's say I went through a breakup, right? And I felt it in a bad way, like shit, like damn, whatever it is. Then I looked at it as like, oh, there's new doors that have opened. That's the positive one. And then the teaching would come in, let's say, which I've had multiple friends come up to me and ask me like, how did I get over the situation? And when I talked about it and let out my feelings, talking about it and coaching those people and letting them know like maybe what they have to do or whatever it is, I felt better about it and kind of like made it my own.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
That's exactly that's a great way to say it, Daniel.
But it's the way that you put it that made it make sense, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is to answer Caleb's question a little bit more directly, is that when my wife left me, that was like a freedom to go to school, right? And to be able to get the master's degree. And then when I contemplated suicide, that ended up being a really good amount of information or basis for the book, right? And so if I hadn't contemplated suicide, I wouldn't have written this. And so that's the thing about these experiences, is that initially, of course, they come with a lot of negative or heavy emotion. If it's divorce, if it's breaking up with a partner, all of that stuff. right? Contemplating suicide. But I have now published this book. I don't know how many times it's been read, shared, whatever, like it's out there. And I've had people around the world message me through social, text, through email and say, hey, this book came to me at the exact right time because I was thinking the exact same things you did. And because you shared your story, because you shared your process, I now have the courage to keep going through it. And so whenever we have the ability to teach someone else the lessons we've learned from our own challenges, it makes it worth it.
100%.
Yeah, that's powerful.
I agree. Yeah, because it one of the biggest things that I've learned from my mentor and just other successful individuals in general is just the idea of not necessarily having to fail at everything to learn. You can learn from others' mistakes. And so it takes somebody to make the mistake or to go through, like you said, to go through something, to be able to then teach it. So if you're in that position, if you've gone through something, if you overcome a certain obstacle and you share that information, you share tactics, you share resources, you share just information in general, that could get not even just one person. You don't know how big that reach and how deep that could really mean to somebody just from you sharing, like, hey, this is what I went through, this is how it felt, this is what I dealt with, these are the things that or the steps that I took to get out of that situation. And I know we've all personally had those people that have come to us and say, like, hey, I know it's probably not going to mean anything to you, but like the things that you told me in this area or whatever the case may be, like really changed my life. So that's powerful.
Yeah. That's what it takes, man, is that if we take the time to really listen to other people, it matters immensely. And then to just be that ear so that they can kind of vent and be seen and feel heard, that matters so much. And then I think the thing that we struggle with as a society a lot is that we don't continually reach out to people, especially if we know they're struggling. And I think that's really the key piece, is that in the moment, on the spot, show up for them, listen really, really well, really empathize with them as they're navigating that tough moment, but then have the courage every few days or every couple of weeks, whatever it is, to reach out to them. How are you doing? What's going on? Can I help with something? Hey, I just found this resource. I want to share it with you. And it's that continual touch point that happens, sometimes weeks or months down the road, that matter. And I have a client right now who I know is going in for a major surgery tomorrow morning. So this evening I am going to send him some messages of support. And then next week, message him again. And then 2 weeks after that, message him again. And just to make sure that he knows unequivocally that someone is in his back pocket that cares about him, right? Because it's a big deal, right? And so for each of us to not only listen, but then also continually follow up to create that safe place, it matters.
Yeah. And it's little acts like that to where, because I know if you flip it, we've all had, certain people who have done certain things like that for us as well. And to you as an individual, you can understand that, wow, this means a lot to me. Like the fact that you're even thinking about me or that you did this for me. But then to the person who's receiving feels that way, but the person who's giving is kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to send them a message and, I know it'll be nice, but you know what I mean? So you start to get that clear picture of how big of an impact you can really make. I love that. Do you guys have anything that throughout the pod
I just want to touch one more time on like that listening piece. When somebody I feel like listening is, like you said, the key to understanding, and not only understanding, but that way you can feel others and be sort of empathetic towards other people.
It really is important. I'm glad you brought that up, Daniel, because there are multiple levels of listening. And the way that it was taught to me was that, the first level of listening is kind of the listening with the intent to respond, right? So you're not really paying attention to the person. You're just trying to respond to him or her to protect yourself, right? The second level of listening is a little better. And what it is that you're actually starting to stop yourself, right? To be able to hear a little bit more of what they're saying without interjecting yourself into the situation. But then the third piece, the third level of listening, it's called listening with the intent to understand. And so what this is when not only are you listening to the words that they say, but you're listening to their tone of voice and you're watching their body language, and you're able to take all of this information in at the same time, immediately connect it to everything that you know about the person, and then to not sit there and judge them or shame them or hurt them in any way, right? You're listening with the intent to just understand their experience, because every soul on this planet has a very different experience. And so it's hard to compare one to the next in that way. So if you're listening with the intent to understand, you're just showing up for them, like Daniel was saying, and you're empathizing, and you're really genuinely showing that you care or trying to help them get rid of whatever pain they're trying to get rid of, or to walk into this next version of their life that they really want to make their way into.
Yeah, I love that. I honestly couldn't agree more. Really, really being there, and it goes to being present. I think a lot of people are not fully present, and when you get these things, it's kind of like everyone's all over the place, distracted, but really focusing on being present. It doesn't know it does. I wouldn't even just say that it only helps the receiving end, because you giving that full attention, that full just I can't think of the word, but just giving it more attention, being present, being fully present. That for me personally, I've noticed the improvement of my quality of life as well, significantly.
That's an actual sales tactic as well, like to just listen to what the other person is saying. So it works definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. That's the thing. So I have a client who is a vice president of sales, and the last time he and I spoke a couple weeks ago was almost exactly what Will just said. The thing that allowed for this guy to be so successful is that he was not salesy, right? He was genuinely a part of his clients' lives, and so he could really understand what it was that they were going through, understood when there was a block, like they couldn't get money, right, to pay for him for something, right? He just really genuinely was there for them in those moments. And he was constantly showing up for them, not only for professional stuff, but also for personal things. And that ability to, worry a little bit less about someone's title or a little bit less about someone's role inside of an organization, that's important to some degree. But what really matters more than anything else is your capacity to listen, because the people that are great listeners are going to be perceived in a very high light by the people who were talking. And what I mean by that is that the human species is designed that we really genuinely like to talk about ourselves. Like we like to tell our story. Like, and it's the truth. Like we are, you think about most major movies, they're built upon something that Joseph Campbell wrote in his book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And it's every movie, not every movie, but most movies around the world are built upon the same 16 steps, right? There's always like this introduction to the main character. You learn a little bit about him or her. He or she gets beat somehow, and then they fall to rock bottom. And then the rest of the movie is just he or she kind of climbing back up to then beat the bad guy.
Yeah.
But the trick is that nobody really talks about is that humans, all of us, all four of us right now are doing that exact same thing every day. Right? We're just going through these cycles. And so if you can listen with the intent to understand and see that a person who you're doing business with has just hit rock bottom personally, well, show up for them, like help them, right? Personally. And then in a couple weeks or a month later, when they need your services, of course, they're going to call you because their emotions were triggered in a very positive way by who you are. So this is, I'll say this, like, I think this is important. So there's a very large public relations firm based out of Europe, and it's called Edelman. And every year they do something called the Trust Barometer. And what it is there are 28 different cities across the world where they survey 33,000 plus people. And they ask them, who do you trust in society? And so they say, do you trust CEOs? Do you trust politicians? Do you trust celebrities, athletes? Do you trust all these people? The answer is no. People do not trust them. But the people that are trusted, there are top two. Number one is a person, quote unquote, like yourself. That is the most trusted person, quote unquote, like yourself. Or number two, a person from my local community. Okay. So when you think about sales or when you think about relationship building, worrying about celebrities, politicians, athletes, doesn't matter. Talking to and being trusted by people in your community or people who are like you, that matters immensely. So when you get to know a person and you find those things that you have in common with him or her, that is the relationship taking hold very quickly. And it's going to be very long lasting because you have so much in common. So if Will is a great listener, sounds like he is, then he is going to be much, much more successful because he's going to find the commonalities. And then he's going to be able to use those to deepen the relationship long term, which will open up a lot of doors for more business. Okay. So we don't trust advertisements and we don't trust all that stuff. What we trust is people like us. So keep finding those commonalities because that's where the trust is.
100%.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool. I don't know about you guys, but if I was a viewer right now, I would be laying back in my chair, overwhelmed. No. This has been fantastic, and I had a really good feeling about this. I know the guys did too. So as far as kind of something that we like to really ask all of our guests is, if you had to give one piece of advice or just one major takeaway from the show, or something that you really want our viewers to walk away with and you really don't want them to forget, what would that one piece of information be?
Yeah, I don't remember where I saw this because it's not my phrase, but it really embodies who I am and what I write about in my book. And the phrase is, be the person you needed when you were younger.
Ooh, I love that.
Oh my gosh.
What's it called? Have you heard of the there's a quote saying, be the person who you'd want to be, or sorry, be the person as if your 80-year-old self and your 8-year-old self were looking at you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. I haven't heard that one before, but I like that. And I think, whether you're looking at yourself like the 8-year-old or the 80-year-old, right, version of yourself, it's like, I think that the key to uncovering our life's purpose and our life's mission is built upon what we didn't have when we were young, right? So when you think about yourself as a kid, or you think about yourself as a teenager or in your early 20s, the things that you wanted most then that you didn't have, when you become those later in life, it's very meaningful. So I was raised on a farm in West Michigan. We've already been talking about snow, right? So you guys know, I felt, because there was nobody around, I didn't have a lot of friends. The high school was very small. I spent a lot of time working. I just didn't have a lot of, coaches, mentors, people around me that I could talk to. So it's not a secret that because I didn't have that later in life, I became that. So be thinking about the things that you didn't have that you really wanted. It's not going to be a material thing. It's going to be a job. It's going to be something career related. It's going to be an emotion, right? It's going to be something like that. And then think about, how do you do that today, right? That's absolutely critical, right? So for me, I always felt like I just didn't have that emotional connection to my family. So now every day I do my absolute best to show up for people emotionally, as a mentor, as a coach, as a friend, as a partner, right? Fill in the blank. And it's enormously meaningful for me because it helps me heal the old wounds that I had from being a kid. Okay. So be the person you needed when you were younger. And when you do that, your life's mission, your core values, right? The things that motivate you, all of those things are likely to just spring up right in front of you.
Oh man.
That's huge for me because I have children and I like to be that person that I didn't have to them. So
that's awesome. Good for you.
I know what you mean for that.
I know that hit you. I just saw it on your face, bro. I saw it in the camera. I was like, this hit Will in some type of way. Oh, I love that. So, and I know we're at like a little over an hour, so I don't want to keep you too long, Michael. But where can the people find you, connect with you, utilize your services? Kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, I've got, michaelseaver.com is the best place to go. So I got a website. There's lots of stuff on there, blog posts to videos to online courses. The book, I'll put it up on the screen, but it's called I Know. practical guide for awakening to what's within and finding work-life integration. And so it's, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google, Apple, all those places, 40,000 retailers around the world. So michaelsseaver.com is the best. My middle name is Scott, so that's why there's the second S in the middle. But, I do free strategy sessions with people. So if anybody listening, watching wants to just talk for 30 minutes, I do it completely free, no sales, nothing like that. I just want to listen and help in any way. So go to michaelsseaver.com. On the homepage, scroll down. There's a blue section there where you can just type in your information, and then the system will send you a link to be able to schedule time on my calendar. So if I can help in any way, whether it's through reading a book or through a strategy discussion, michaelsseaver.com.
Wow. I love that. Just honestly, and that's something we talked about last week, is just providing value, just figuring out how you can provide value to people. And that's exactly what you're portraying. So I love that. Thank you so much. And we're going to actually, for you guys, for all of our viewers out there, we're going to obviously leave his link down there to his site. And then we're going to grab a couple of links, for sure, the Amazon link to his book. So that way you guys can go ahead and grab that. So with that being said, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Do you guys have anything that you guys want to leave the viewers with?
I was going to ask him about a book, but check out his book. I know.
I've got another one for you, Will. Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah.
One of the books that most helped me in the last couple of years, when it comes to understanding, kind of the birth to age 6 thing, or what happens after age 6, it's called Loyalty to Your Soul. And the book was written by Ron and Mary Holnick, right? So obviously, I Know is a great book to help get to the point of self-discovery. But if you're looking for the difference between the human soul and the human ego, or the human unconscious versus the human conscious, read Loyalty to Your Soul by Ron and Mary Holnick. It'll give you so much insight into that kind of dichotomy.
Oh, I'm definitely, that's but
Yeah, I'm gonna put that on my list.
yeah.
Did you? I know you mentioned Dr. Joe Dispenza. Did you get to read Becoming Supernatural?
I didn't read it. I followed him on social, and I read a lot of the stuff on his website, but I haven't read that book. Was there something, Daniel, that you really liked about it?
I didn't read it yet. It's just I just heard you mention him, and I was like, he must have read it. He sounds like he's got it all figured out.
I just spend a lot of time reading and listening, right? I've got all these books. I've got this one. I got Jordan Peterson. So if you haven't read
Jordan Peterson too.
We're even going old school with Carl Jung, right? So
Carl Jung, yep.
Right. So this is what I do on Saturday nights. I just read old stuff, right? Carl Jung, Jordan Peterson, like the Holnicks. Like I just love to read and learn. But I haven't read Dispenza yet, but I got to dive in.
That's what's up. That's what it is. You just keep learning day by day, and like you mentioned, every day you get better.
Yep. So true.
Daniel, anything you want to leave the people with today?
If y'all not as overwhelmed as I am, then that's all, folks.
We love you guys, and we really just, again, the goal of this podcast is to really just change people's perspectives, change their minds, open your guys' minds, be more optimistic, and just see that there's more to what you know every day and what you do every day. So just remember that. Help us get to our goal of 1,000 people. Obviously, we're not going to stop there, but if you can just share with your friends, family, repost us, comment, whatever you guys can do, leave us a rating on all the podcast platforms. Go ahead and like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And with that being said, we will see you guys on the next episode.
Sure.
All righty.
Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure.